What about when practitioners get lost in the in the spiritual ideologies? What about when the practitioner is not caring for themselves, not in the sense of eating, sleeping, decompressing, but in the sense of repeated use, ongoingly having more and more 5-MeO DMT, and possibly in the case of Tobias, building these weird spiritualized constructs that reinforce the continued use. At what point? I just like you to comment on that.
On one hand, there's the psychonaut um, going and taking it themselves. There's also the repeat participant that keeps on going back to the facilitator, back to the facilitator. I like to look at that. I have a little visualization or imagery that I use, and I like to think of that along the what we're doing when we encounter, say, 5-MeO DMT, and I'm just going to talk about that because that's what I know the most. But you can really fill in the blanks with other things. It's just there's a life force there, and we are upholding or maintaining the life force by doing beautiful work that, say, Bufo or 5-MeO DMT offers us. And I picture that support line as an electrical line outside. And that electrical line is supported by poles. And that pole might be represented as a regenerative experience, maybe a ceremony, maybe a session with 5-MeO DMT. It brings up the energy, so to speak, as the power line goes across it. And in between those poles, there's gravity, the weight of the world. And that line will sag in between those poles. And so it's in between those ceremonies, in between those experiences that are very uplifting and regenerative, where we live 99% of our lives. And whatever we do in between those poles is the maintenance of that healthy, balanced, parallel to the ground life work, life experience. And when I hear, as you're commenting about somebody like Tobias taking 5-MeO DMT again and again and again, what I see is that instead of just doing the work, so to speak, the old adage of the chopping of the wood and the hauling of the water before and after enlightenment, instead of doing that, well, why don't we just erect a pole right next to the other one?
Hmm.
And why don't we just erect a whole bunch of poles so that there is no sag and there is no need to do any work? We just keep on going back to the regenerative pole. And in that, I think that we can lose touch with reality, 3D life. We lose touch with the art of living, which is in large part consists of that time and space in between those poles. And the art of living might involve other aspects of self-care, that involve, who knows, whatever your self-care practices are. And so when I consider what's happening with somebody like Tobias, I see like, wow, I don't know how I would maintain sanity if I built so many poles right next to one another. And that's where the majority of my reality would be. Um, I can't imagine that. Fortunately or whatever, I've never experienced that, but um, that's how I kind of frame that.
Hmm.
Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. I mean, there's a couple things there. One of which, I mean, to be clear about people who haven't heard my episode about what happened to Tobias, we're talking about it pretty casually here, but it is a really tragic thing that happened to a beautiful, caring man, and I want that perspective to be held, even though it might not be immediately assumed for people listening.
Hmm.
And I think there's a deep caring like I feel a deep caring in even talking about it for him, and also to the larger cultural world, why we're talking about it at all. And I sense that in you too, especially your first response earlier in the episode, made it clear that there was a lot of caring there, and caring because it's not just Tobias that's been caught up in this, in this, we'll just say, like this repeated use trap that some people find themselves in with 5-MeO-DMT, and that there was a whole community of people around him, some of which different communities, a small community reinforcing and making it worse. So and then the other thing too is in a conversation with a guy who I really respect and appreciate out in Vancouver, he was talking about ceremony, and I think he was maybe talking, like, referencing oh shit, who wrote Iron John? What's the, you know, that book?
No.
Shit. Robert Bly. I see it on my shelf right there. That life, like, we're like clay, and as we go through life, we're sort of like in the muck, and life is sort of like packing the muck on, and also sort of like forming us. And when we go into ceremony, what we end up doing is just like, we're going into pack and then kiln, like to pack and bake. And then we go back into the world, and then we have to like go in, shape and bake, shape and bake. And if we don't go into ceremony at all, then, you know, by the time, you know, our age of majority comes up, whatever that is, insofar as our role in caring for the generations to follow, and the you know, the culture and society that we are showing up to, then we're not going to be able to be a vessel to carry anything of any substantial value. Like, we'll not be a good water vessel, for example. But if we stay in ceremony for too long and we don't come out, cool down, and pack in those other layers, we become a cracked pot. And we can't bear water either. But we might appear as though we could. We can't. So there's something there about, like, ceremony being very important. And I mean, maybe the dichotomy falls apart at some point, but the reference, I think it was Iliade, that entering into the profane is also important, as well. So I mean, I imagine you
That's
have
a
some.
beautiful image. I like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I imagine you have something to say to that. But to really close out, is there anything? I don't know what this question is, and I'm certain you're going to caveat it as not being an authority on this question. But, you know, what can communities do when they see someone falling into that repeated use trap? Like, what? I mean, obviously, it'd be different to each different situation, and each different person. But what are some general thoughts you have in the sense of, like, how do we keep that person we care about safe? And what are the degrees of response?
Wow. That really touches me, because I had somebody dear to me who also died in a Bufo-related death. And in hindsight, internally and with others in that person's world, look back and saw, well, what could have I done?
Mm-hmm.
What could have benefited or prevented that, if you will? And somehow not being scared to bring it up. I don't know how we come to that, but I saw in my own unconscious, when I was looking back into I was like, for sure, I noticed things. I had question marks about some things that I was experiencing and seeing in this person. And yet I didn't go further with them. It's like I wasn't listening, or I had no one else to rebound, to have a sounding board with. And I'm not sure why that is. They were there, but I was reluctant. I was reluctant to to come across as being doubtful or mistrustful or disrespectful or critical or skeptical. And I don't know why that was important to me, quite frankly, but I know that there's a certain chagrin that I have in not having discussed this, the little things that I saw, not only with this person who eventually died, but with the people in his entourage, in our social circle. And so I think that would have resulted in perhaps an intervention. And then what does an intervention look like? Is it one-on-one? Is it community-based? Does it come from community or a collective? I don't know. What I imagine, what I envision as a response to experiences like these is a sort of perhaps like an anonymous umbrella body or association that can be contacted, that can be said, there's this is happening. I'm noticing this. What can I do? Kind of like a hotline that can be responded to in an anonymous fashion, an anonymous and neutral fashion that has a systematic approach to responding to preemptive concerns or full-fledged conflicts, etc. That there's an ombudsman that receives the call and has a system that can take action, whether that be an intervention, whether that be education and support for those around the person who's making this kind of anonymous call, like, I think this person is like this, or having a full out so-called justice system that can come in not as an intervention, but as a collective healing platform. I envision that, and that visioning comes from the stories such as Tobias, the other incidents that have happened in both North America and Europe in the last year. And I do care, and that's why I want to talk about this vision. Mm-hmm. There's a top-down idea that is the vision, but really the vision is from the bottom up, and it requires the practitioners to take responsibility, like you said earlier, to come on board. Let's have a bigger picture outlook here. What's going on? How can we be in service to not just my own practice and the people that I invite into it with best practices, etc., but how can I contribute to this very fast growing modality? And I really think that the simple gesture and act of coming together is where it starts.